All right, we're now recording. So I think Sylvia is here. Or no, sorry, not Sylvia. Hold on a second. I got my
Yeah,
S names right up. Shannon is next. So give me a second here while I get my tech organized.
no problem. Shannon and I met by accident.
How did we meet, Rob?
I can't remember. It's the type of person you meet that you can never remember how you met because you're fast friends the second you start
The
going.
first conversation, yes,
It was because of the word catalyst, but I think you're going to talk about that.
I will.
All right, so I'm gonna just start out with a brief thank you to our sponsor. That's the Gray Swan Guild. The Guild's a modern virtual think tanks that's formed in response to COVID-19 pandemic to help individuals and organizations make sense of the abrupt changes we continue to experience. In 1 year, the Guild has grown to over 1,000 members in 65 countries, and they all drive focus to the Gray Swans. The Guild provides fact-based analysis to support contingency planning for all conceived, predictable, and predictive gray swans. Please help build the Guild by joining us. And for more information, you can visit our website at grayswanguild.org, which you can see at the bottom of that slide right there. All right, next I'm now going to hand it over to your thought leader. This topic is going to be called Move Fast, Break Shit, and Burnout. And this is with Shannon Lucas. Let me just put some of that information in the chat for you so you have it handy. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Shannon. You're going to be talking about what it means to be a catalyst and how to move fast without losing people, break shit with intentionality, and lessen the intensity of burnout cycle. Take it away, Shannon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. How are you guys doing? You're on a marathon. Good fun topics though. Thanks for having me. Can I go ahead and share?
Yeah, go ahead. It'll turn me off. It should
Great.
turn me off.
Yeah, so I'm actually going to focus. I decided to pivot a little bit, so you will learn about what I promised, but I also wanted to talk to the people here who might be leaders of Catalysts as well. And I'm super curious if you guys wanted to chat sort of as we're arriving, where you are on your level of burnout right now. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is like you're supercharged and listening to great talks all day and you're ready to go. And 5 is you're crispy burnt and you're ready to crash for a weekend, a month or more. So I will chat mine in too and see what everyone is doing. We've got a 4. I right now I'm about at a 4 too, but I'm going away right after this call to the mountains where there's no cell coverage or Wi-Fi or anything. So you have to plan that into your schedule to manage your burnout. Eli is on a 1. Nice. We have a 2.5 and a 4. As you guys probably know, 5 emotionally, 1 sleep deprived. That makes a lot of sense, Sean. Anyway, it's lovely to have you. It's been quite a year, and a lot of us are experiencing burnout, whether or not we are catalysts, but we'll talk a little bit about what that means. I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm Shannon Lucas. I'm the co-CEO of Catalyst Constellations. I've spent the last 20 plus years in the corporate world doing corporate innovation at companies like Vodafone, Cisco, T-Mobile, and Microsoft, helping them create their own startups and new ventures. I've done the actual startup worlds. This is not my first company that I've personally started, and most recently was executive vice president of emerging business at Ericsson. I'm going to start off by telling a story about my time at Vodafone. When I started the innovation program at Vodafone, we knew a couple of things. We knew that we didn't want it to be an ivory tower of innovation. We knew that there were positive troublemakers who were out throughout the organization. If you're not familiar with Vodafone, it's one of the world's largest mobile telephony companies. They're in over 30 countries directly and with lots of partner companies in different countries. And so we started by just sort of tapping and finding the people that we knew were those positive troublemakers, those 8 people. And we knew that if we took this network approach, that they would probably also know some of the positive troublemakers in their different regions. I spent 4 years building out the program, and by all metrics, it was super successful. We shifted how the company thought about engaging with their customers. You know, our big focus was, let's not just talk to IT and procurement, like let's talk to the C-level, the line of business owners to understand their challenges and help them ideate and figure out on a Horizon 1, Horizon 2, and Horizon 3 perspective, how mobile technology could transform their business. This started in 2010, so you can imagine it was like the early heady days of we can digitize everything, we can connect everybody. So even though the whole program was successful, I ended up often feeling like a failure. I could track bottom line impact, I could track the number of customers, I could track the innovation champions, and I had a very robust system. We had this gamified, certified, CEO endorsed, incentivized innovation champion program. People had to apply, they had to get managerial approval, they had to get VP approval. But I was constantly struggling with the fact that no matter how big the program grew, it was always the same 10 to 15% of people that were really leaning in. Those people for whom I actually had to clear the path because they were moving so quickly. I had to put the processes and structures in place because they were moving so fast. And it was interesting in hindsight looking, because I ended up spending so much time focusing on the other 80%. I was like, I felt like it was a personal failure. I was like, I just can't activate them the right way. I can't give them the right skill set. I can't incentivize them the right way. During that time, I hired Tracey Lovejoy, who is now my co-CEO at Catalyst Constellations, as an executive coach. Tracey had spent 12 years at Microsoft, leveraging her ethnographic and user design skills for the innovation and product design team. She had left and become a certified coach, and that was the context in which I met her. And we worked together on and off for a couple of years. And during those years, as every good coach is supposed to do, she was trying to figure out what her niche was. Was it female founders? Was it people in tech? You know, she's trying to sort of use her ethnographic skills to figure out her niche. And she couldn't identify what the common thread was between the people that she loved working with. So she applied her skills and basically did an ethnographic research study and came up with the concept of catalysts. When Tracey interviewed me as one of the final people that she interviewed, it was like the clouds cleared. It's like, this explains everything. This explains the problems that I had been having with the Innovation Champion program. As a side note, I had also created my own support community called the Global Entrepreneur Salon, because it's so exhausting sometimes being that entrepreneur in those large organizations. I was like, well, I'll create a side group and get some energy from them. And the exact same thing repeated itself in that group, even though I had hand selected them. It was like 10 to 15% of the people leaned in to co-create, much like the Gray Swan Guild does. And the other ones were just sort of hangers on. They would show up, but they weren't really leaning in. And so I said to her, I said, you know, I do have this group of people. The burnout that you're talking about as a sort of piece of what it means to be a catalyst is real. And so we got together, and that was the birth of our company. So that's all background. And I know that we're doing a little bit of recording here, but I am just going to invite everyone now to just take a minute and arrive, because you guys have been in a heady day all day. We're in Zoom calls, as Rob was mentioning, back to back. So if it feels comfortable to you, just maybe closing your eyes for a minute or keeping a soft downward gaze, just letting yourself arrive with a few breaths. That head you have is connected to a body. This body is in a present moment, a place and time, a chair, a room. Letting yourself breathe in deeply, letting your belly fully expand. Maybe just settling into the stillness for a moment. Maybe feeling your heart rate slow down, your shoulders relax. And then maybe just gently thanking yourself for giving yourself this time for all these amazing conversations, and then coming back to the group. Just a little mini brain reset. Thank you. Happy face. So today I'm going to talk about what it means to be a catalyst. I'm going to clarify why organizations need catalysts now more than ever, and we'll talk about some best practices for how to engage your catalysts. So fast forward, Tracey and I started our company a few years ago, and we were doing retreats for a number of years, and the retreats were super successful in helping people who identified as catalysts sort of claim their superpowers, take that pause that we just did, extend it over a weekend, and leave with a more intentional life and a deeper understanding of how they move through the world. But we realized that we were mission driven and we wanted to touch as many lives as possible, and we weren't going to do that in retreats. And we also wanted people to understand the depth of the research about what it means to be a catalyst. So last year, during a pandemic, it was really good timing. We wrote a book called Move Fast, Break Shit, Burn Out, The Catalyst Guide to Working Well. It was one of Entrepreneur's top magazines for 2021. So I hope you can pick it up. And some of the things, whether or not you're a catalyst, you could consider things that we tackle in the book are, who are your wicked action-oriented problem solvers in your organization or your system? Do you know how they operate? Because they do operate differently. And this was the big aha when Tracey told me about the research. Do you know how to find and productively engage them? And so I'll start by what is a catalyst? A catalyst is a person or a thing or event that quickly causes a change or action. That's the stuff that we were taught in sort of high school chemistry, if we can remember that far back. But our version of a catalyst is they are change makers with an unstoppable drive to action, brimming with ideas to make the world better. And so you can see why we're so excited to dedicate our lives to supporting these people. We're often called things like disruptors or change makers or problem solvers or troublemakers. And while they aren't all necessarily meant in a good way when they're given to us, and we can talk about that, we've often sort of worn them as a badge of honor. Yeah, I'm a positive troublemaker, but there's something a little bit hidden in there, not so hidden, about how people can experience us and the sort of friction we can cause. So if we think about what it means to be a change agent, there's this broad group of change agents. And at a high level, someone can choose to be a change agent at a certain moment, and then they can step back and say, I'm good with that frustration for a while. I'm just going to go back to business as usual. Catalysts are a subset of change agents. And one of the biggest differences is it's not a choice. It's who we are. Now, we haven't done the research about whether you're born or sort of nurtured this way, the whole nature nurture, but most catalysts report, identifying as being different early on in their lives. And it's because we have these innate qualities. And the 6 attributes that define us include piecing together information quickly. So I'm guessing there's a lot of people in the Grace Swan Guild who are doing that and piecing together what they connected from all of these different talks today. And from that, we start to see lots of possibilities, the intersections of these ideas and where those things are headed. And from that, we start to create visions. And this is like how the world can be better based on all of those dots that we just connected. If we just stopped there, we might have chosen the word visionary, but catalysts aren't just visionaries because we have this almost burning desire, this physical need to move into action, to make that vision a reality. We're essentially born, or early, we adopt this experimentation mindset, which is why so many of us end up, in fields where design thinking or lean startup or user research or the scientific method is sort of the modality of our industry, because it's actually how our brain works and we feel very comfortable there. So these are kind of the 5 inherent things that are in us and how we show up. There is a 6th attribute, which is a little bit different, because this is more about how people perceive us. We're perceived as being intuitive. We're perceived as being comfortable with risk and ambiguity. But if you ask the catalyst, as they're moving into that action towards the vision, it doesn't seem risky or ambiguous to them because they've connected all of the dots and created the vision. Now, they might not be great at articulating it, but it seems very clear to them and not that risky. Also on that point, I'll note that there's a range of catalyticness. So I am on the hyper catalytic end, and Tracey, as a user researcher, ethnographer, et cetera, she's a little bit more considered. She's waiting for more data and she'll take a little bit more time with things. So if you're wondering if you're a catalyst, here's some questions that you can ask yourself. Do you feel driven to make the world around you better? Do you frequently piece together pieces of information and see that path to action? Do you sometimes overwhelm people around you with all the ideas you have? Do you sometimes overwhelm yourself with all the ideas you have? Do you often challenge the status quo or get referred to as disruptive? Rob, I'm looking at you. When tackling a challenge, are you comfortable trying different approaches and figuring out which is the most effective as you go? Or does the term catalyst just feels like it fits? If you answered yes to every one of these, in our belief, you are a catalyst. If that doesn't feel comfortable, you don't have to own it. But I do want to try and do a poll so that we're gonna do a Menti here. If you guys have used Menti, you can go here, so menti.com, and use this code to get in. Everyone got the code? Maybe I can type it into the chat too, actually, so that you have it. Extreme catalyst, Rob says. Yes. All right. So if you're in Menti, you should be able to see the first question. Oh, sorry, we'll go back. This is the first question. How do you relate to the term catalyst? I'm definitely a catalyst and it feels like we've really seen you. You might be a catalyst. Several of the attributes describe you, or you're definitely not a catalyst. Okay, are you guys able to, we got one, might be a catalyst. We'll see if other people, are you able to? Are you able to access the Menti? I only see one vote, menti.com. Yes, thank you. Thumbs up. I see Rob squinting. Eli, are you able to get in? Oh, it asked if you could identify the catalyst. That's interesting. If you refresh, you should be able to see the question now. Can you refresh your screen? How about this? How about you just type in chat? Are you a catalyst? Yes, no, maybe. Just want to see how many catalysts. Yes, Eli is. Yes, Lori is. Monica, maybe. Lori's a maybe. Monica's a yes. Yes, I know Rob is. So we have no definitely not catalysts yet. It looks like on Menti, 75% of you want to be an 11 on a scale of 10. Awesome. All right. And then the next question is, which you can do on Menti, so you can refresh or you can just type it in. Now that you know what it is, do you, it's like, do you want to be one? Careful what you wish for. Now that you know what it is, do you think that you can identify them in your organization? Do you know who those people are that you might work with? So far, we've got 100% say yes. You can feel free to also type it in chat. Yes, same Menti code. Thank you, Lori. Yeah, Guy, it isn't easy, right? We'll talk about that. Yes. All right. So you guys are getting the idea. You know how now to find the catalyst. You have a term that you can use to put to these people. And actually, we have the data so we can help organizations identify first. In the right context, it can be great, 100%. So let's just take a step back. We're living in this crazy pandemic world. And if this world in the last year has taught us anything, it's that what is normal, what that normal that we had based our entire worldview on, our ways of working, it's not eternal, right? And it highlighted that what we may have known intellectually in terms of change being the only true constant and that the pace of change is accelerating and intensifying, it's no longer theoretical. We've literally just lived through one of our biggest, first VUCA, most obvious moments. We can recognize this world of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, which is otherwise known as VUCA. If you're not familiar with this term, this is a term that the US military came up with in the 1980s to describe what they saw as the post-Cold War reality. They were talking about sort of the high velocity and ever-changing world that they found themselves in. And remember, in the 80s, this was before like really the internet or digital revolution or anything. So they were already talking in these terms: uncertainty, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And the question is now, if this is our new reality and we can no longer ignore it, who's going to help lead the way through this complex and ambiguous world? Well, in the 1990s, the founder of the Institute for the Future, Bob Johansen, came up with his response to this that he calls Vuca Prime. And these are essentially like the skills or traits that you need to be able to respond to your VUCA reality. And so you see vision, understanding, clarity, and agility. And if you can think about the things that I already mentioned in terms of how catalysts show up in the world, those are the things that we do. We connect the dots. The understanding is that we start to see the patterns. We create the clarity of vision, and then we have this speed and agility to move into action. These are definitional traits of catalysts, but we don't stop there. We have that big component of action that keeps us from just sort of being the visionaries here. We drive towards impact. So we decided to do some more research and say, you know, what are the thought leaders around the world saying are the skills that are needed in order to be able to respond to VUCA? So we basically did sort of analysis of all of the articles that were out there and condensed it down. And these are the high level traits that, you know, they claim organizations need to find and develop so that they can be VUCA ready. That sense making, the learning agility, the comfortability with the uncomfortability, the adaptability, the metacognition, the ability to inspire others. And then we did another piece of research where we asked both catalysts themselves and their leaders how they would quantify the skills that they bring to the table. And you'll see it's literally a one-to-one match. This is a challenge though, because not all leaders understand things, and some of these things like high EQ and dot connecting are still sort of not valued or captured at the end of year review. But at least we can see that the thought leaders are starting to see that these are the traits that are needed. But let me be clear, as people were sort of mentioning in the chat, catalysts come with our own challenges as well. So I'm going to let this build. You can read them, but you know, even though we have these superpowers, we can have these wicked blind spots. We can have trouble getting our ideas across. Vision seems super clear to us, but we can really struggle to make it clear to other people. We can be perceived as arrogant because we are certain that we're right after we've connected all those dots. We can be impatient. We move faster, which means that we're sort of isolated and people don't like us. We can be driven by this all-consuming passion, and so we can leave people behind. And the irony of ironies is as soon as we start to make traction on that thing and we see the organization or our ecosystem start to adopt it, we can have problems staying interested in it. And we'll move on to the next challenge. This leads to basically 3 high-level consequences for us. That lack of clarity, we can kind of spin out. Sometimes we think we're clear, but we're not. And the more sort of resistance we get, we can lose clarity. The burnout is real. It's part of the reason we named the book that. And the isolation, which can be really frustrating because we just feel so misunderstood. We're usually just in service of trying to make the world better. And when we get shut out, it can cause a lot of trauma, in fact. One other thing about catalysts is we have this sort of similar catalyst energetic journey as we go through creating change. So we'll start that beginning phase where we're like on this massive steep incline, we're connecting all the dots, we're showing up at Grey Swan Guild and learning all of this amazing stuff, we're connecting with new people, we're finding new projects to work on. And it all comes to a pinnacle of this incline where we're just like a few more hours, a few more weekends, I can just like, it's coming, I can see it. And in that process, when it feels like euphoria, where you're starting to see this thing that no one else has seen before, we've likely given up our normal routines. We've said, you know, just 2 more hours of work, I don't need to go to the gym today, etc. By the time we move into a phase that we call orchestration, which is, you know, how are we going to get other people on board and help us sort of manifest this vision in the world, we can start to get really frustrated. And so orchestration is interesting because it has 2 sides to it. One is it's generally not our superpower, our super skill in terms of, getting all of the people in the orchestra to play to our song. And so we start to lose energy there. But we don't lose a ton of energy though, because we are starting to see traction. This is when those words that were dirty words that we couldn't say a year ago, we start hearing coming back to us because someone else in the organization has started to normalize it. And you're like, wait, I think I know where that came from. The net though is that creating change causes resistance. That's just the nature of creating change. And when you're the catalyst in an organization or an ecosystem, your ideas or yourself can become the lightning rod for the resistance. If you're in a corporation, we sometimes call it the corporate immune response system. And so our ideas and ourselves can get attacked, which then can lead to trauma, especially because we just feel like we're just in service of creating the best next thing. And inevitably it leads to burnout. And that burnout is like, you just can't even get back to those normal routines that were disrupted. You just can't get out of bed. It becomes really hard. So one of the other things that's important for catalysts to understand, yeah, you got a question? Rob? Oh.
No, I was admitting someone, I have to do this to admit someone. Just admit someone to Zoom and interrupt Shannon's process and thinking.
It's all good, because the thing is, I live this. This is my vision, action, iteration. This is how I move through the world. So this is what we call the catalyst formula. And this is where it's really helpful for catalysts to recognize that they actually do operate and move differently through the world than most people do. Like I said earlier, it's also known as design thinking and lean startup. This is the solid foundation for a lot of sort of methodologies that we use. We'll create that vision from all of the dots that we're connecting. We'll move really quickly into the action, and then we'll iterate based on the data that we found, and then we'll reinform the vision. The challenge is, if we move too fast from our vision and we haven't made sure that people are really clear in understanding what the hell we're talking about, by the time we've moved off, we've moved too fast and we've already left people. And this is the #1 reason that Catalyst fails, because before you even jumped off the starting block, everyone is in the meeting shaking their heads as if they understood, and you walked out left to go start building it, and they went out right and started having a conversation about what the hell just happened, right? So this is where we can just sort of start to cause the resistance. The next place that we sort of break down is in the action piece. If we aren't really intentional about the action steps that we're taking, we can unintentionally break shit. So we're not saying that you aren't going to break shit as a catalyst, but you want to break shit with intentionality so that you can defend it, you know the purpose of it, you know the data that you're getting. But in this, if we're moving too fast and lacking intentionality, we can again just exacerbate the resistance. And when we do that, what happens is we actually increase the swirl of iteration, because now we have to solve for not just the thing that we were trying to create in the world, but we have to solve for all of the resistance that we just generated by potentially failing on the first 2 steps. And this becomes this massive swirl of iteration. And this is what sends us ultimately down into burnout. Helping catalysts understand that this is both their innate process, but also that most other people don't operate this way, it's just a healing thing. It's like, oh, I understand myself now. I understand why other people didn't get me. But it also then helps us sort of slow down and freeze frame each step and just move a little bit slower so that we can be more effective in creating change. And the other thing that we advocate here is to put this into a container of compassion, rejuvenation, and a big container of rejuvenation that includes compassion and empathy. We have to sort of manage our own energy, as you saw on that energy curve. But as we're slowing down, we can actually bring empathy for the people that, we may be frustrating them just as much as we're frustrated. We can bring that empathy and compassion and understanding and say, do you understand the vision? Do you understand your role in the vision? Is there a win in this vision for you? And if you're on board, how are you going to do something differently tomorrow? And obviously, if we just add a little bit of rejuvenation, like going to the mountains every once in a while or tracking our energy tank, we can sustain our energy change-making capabilities for longer. And we have a saying, a burnt out catalyst creates no change at all. And that's usually when catalysts will start to prioritize rejuvenation, because we may not do it for ourselves, but if we realize that it's in service of the vision that we're trying to create, we might. So I'll just stop before I go on to the next thing and see if there are any questions so far. You can chat them in or just shout them out.
No question, but just feedback. I'm living what you're saying and can value the cadence of consensus and iterative build that sort of has the short-term solution in mind, but the long-range vision, and there is quite a delicate balance there. So for those going down that road, you know, having a structural guidance like you and your co-author provide, I think is very helpful, particularly when you're dealing in the new and the unknown and maybe the esoteric, the complex with startups, which is largely what I've been doing the last couple of years. So.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for sharing. And there's another piece that we won't talk a lot about today, but just the emotional labor that catalysts have in terms of bringing people along, making sure that they understand, bringing in the empathy, and that can add to the drain sometimes. So there's also a question, do you find catalysts align with particular roles such as strategy and innovation? Yeah, 100%. It's interesting because, you know, I come from the corporate innovation background at a high level, and Tracey comes from the user researcher perspective. And so you could argue the people in our community might be overly represented because those are the concentric circles of our network. But there's another hypothesis here, which is that these roles actually allow us to use our superpowers most effectively. Like when you're in the ambiguous innovation space or strategy space, it allows us to do that dot connecting, but hopefully also then actually start to action on it. So 100%, I think there are some places where catalysts are overrepresented, and catalysts are across the organization. So if you're trying to drive change, which we'll talk about, finding your catalyst in HR, your finance catalyst, your legal catalyst. Like I needed some really strong catalytic legal people when I was creating new IP agreements and, you know, joint partnerships with these massive corporations, because I was breaking almost every IP rule and partnership agreement that we had. All right, I will continue on. Feel free to chat other questions. Oh yeah, there's another question there. Hand up, I saw.
Well, I was just going to say it has so much to do too with the context you're working within, because you were describing a scenario where you don't get your idea across, but part of working with a team is that there's one definition of creativity is someone who's not afraid to make mistakes, so that you throw things out and you ride off other people's ideas. And sometimes you go back to what sounded stupid at the beginning and you think, oh, what about a bit of that? So that's the caution in feeling like you have to have everything ironed out before you present it, because, you know, then you're wasting so much of that rich pageant of, again, depending on what it is, you know, if it's a creative endeavor.
Totally. No, you're spot on. And I'm not advocating to say, what I'm saying when catalysts fail to share the vision is not that I'm saying that they need to have the perfect vision from the beginning. It can be actually still really, really vague, and you get increasingly, this is why we go through the vision action iteration, you know. When I started at Ericsson, just as an example, I knew broadly what my customer bases were. I was working with like the web scale players and I was working with industrials. So you start to develop a hypothesis about how you can create new business opportunities with industrials. It takes you like 18 months to figure out through co-creation and iteration and all of those things, like what that actual strategy is. But you have to have like something for people to respond to. And we can sometimes even, because we can be so like esoteric or out of their bubble that they can't even imagine the world that we're talking about. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the experimentation mindset, we're not afraid of taking the risk of failing. We see that as part of the process. It can, if it becomes really catastrophic and the resistance gets really big, we can stumble just like everybody else. But our tolerance for that risk and ambiguity and experimentation mindset, we would invite that conversation. We'd probably be more likely to start it with, let's co-create, and who has the crazy ideas and what are we going to keep and what are we going to throw out? So yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So if you have Catalyst, this is the quiz part, more interaction. So what do you guys see is the value of Catalyst now that we've talked about them for a while, especially in this VUCA world that we're living in? And feel free to either shout it out or type it into chat. Any thoughts? Thank you, Monica. Oh, new relationships. Interesting. Yep. Agents of change. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, I think that catalysts are often an important part of bringing about something new or something that seemed impossible before. But it really takes someone who's willing to go through that, over the hump of that ambiguity and risk, and go all the way through it in order to bring the new thing about. And there aren't a lot of people who have that ability.
Yeah, the new dots, the connecting the new dots, totally. Well, I will just start building the slide for you guys. This is our take. We think that catalysts have a lot to bring to the table, but living in this VUCA era and with our lives being disrupted, catalysts are essentially born VUCA ready. And so now, yeah, enabling transformation totally around digital and customer experience. Chief digital officers often understand the value of catalysts. And when supported, the catalyst can be sort of the brightest action-oriented problem solvers driving results. So if you think about high potential programs, I was just having this conversation yesterday, the challenge that we have with high potential programs, if they're not done right or they aren't considering some of these things, is that high performers in a traditional hierarchical structure like we've had for the last 100 years generally know how to perform to exactly the KPIs that they were given, to manage up to the bosses that they had, to execute on the strategy that was given to them. But in our really ambiguous world, we need these bright, get shit done people who can also bring in the tangential thinking and saying, actually, you gave me the wrong KPIs. This is the stuff that we need to be talking about in our team right now. Statistically speaking, it's important that you understand catalysts because you probably have some in your life, in your organization, and without the proper support, they can be disruptive, as you saw on our challenge slides. And this is why it's so healing when catalysts connect, because they didn't understand that they were being disruptive unintentionally. They were just getting frustrated because they didn't operate like everyone else and they didn't move at the speed. So it's important that we identify them and then that we give them the support. Because if you aren't reaching out to these high potential problem solvers and supporting them, in time, you will lose them. And not super secretly, our goal is to have like the 100 best places to work for catalysts in the next 5 years. So if you aren't on that list, then all the catalysts will be going to those companies. So how do we identify and support your catalysts in an organization? There's 4 key pillars that I'm going to talk about: finding them, of course, training them, supporting them, and connecting them. How do you find them? Well, we've done actually a big lit review of a lot of programs that either were called catalyst programs or champion programs and all of this stuff. So this is based both on research and on our own experience, but starting organically if you can, right? You probably know, like I did it at Vodafone, who those positive troublemakers are, and you can start with them. So you can start to expand the network. You can also create a sort of formal volunteering application process, and you can actually screen for catalysts. Like we have the data to be able to do that, so that you don't end up in the place that I was at Vodafone with this whole big group of people who say they want to do something, but actually aren't really going to lean in and be the early adopters and doers. And then importantly, as you're finding your first cohort of catalysts, it's important to curate for diversity. And I mean that in all the different ways. People who have been at the company for 20 years, people who've been there for 2 years, people who are from finance and operations, and people who bring different neurodiversity and diversity, like all the different kinds, because there's richness even within the catalyst community of all of the different types of thought approaches. Once you find them, of course, you have to train them because they don't know how they work. And that's one of the biggest problems that they have with how they, move through the world, and can cause more disruption than they're meaning to do. So as we've seen, it's, helping them self-identify and then understand their unconscious ways of working, those superpowers and blind spots. Helping them create a common shared language and understanding about that. And if you do these two things, you can help them stop being negatively disruptive, and you can help give them some of the concrete tools that are going to help them overcome those blind spots and help them navigate change, much more gracefully without pissing people off and minimizing some of their own burnout. And having this community of supporters who share a common language actually starts accelerating how the change can be done and how they can, how they can partner together across the organization. You need to help them understand what it means to be a catalyst, and then help them understand in your world what's required to create change. So we're not going in and advocating and saying you need to use this methodology to create change. No, identify your catalyst and then tell them what's contextually relevant. You need to set them up to succeed. They don't need to reinvent every process in the organization. You just need to help them understand which processes can be changed and which ones are off the table. If you have a new idea or vetting process, a change management or a strategy implementation methodology, give them that and teach them those approaches, but also tell them what the guardrails are, because they won't know. And catalysts might dream way bigger than your organization is ready to dream. And that's okay. But you just need to pull them back and say, this is the sandbox that we can play in. If Horizon 3 is off the table, if you're not allowed to cannibalize your own revenue this year, tell them that, because they'll find the next best thing that they can do and set everyone up for success. It's important too to train your leaders. So this is kind of a trick one, but sadly, no leaders have really been trained in how to support catalysts, and we're hoping to change that. The good news is that everything that a catalyst needs to be successful, which is imperative for a catalyst, is also good for catalysts for everyone else too. It's important that leaders understand the value of catalysts and how their working styles happen so that they can support them, keeping them focused, keeping them in the guardrails, making sure they're not taking on too much and burning out and all of that stuff. But the other skills that they need are the things that were identified in the Project Aristotle output that Google and Rework did. If you're not familiar with it, I highly recommend it. But like I said, the things that they need, like psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, and impact, Google was just talking about high-performing teams. They weren't talking specifically about catalysts, but these things are critical for catalysts because you're asking them to go into a place that no one's gone before. You're asking them to do the divergent thinking and coming back with some provocative statements. And if there isn't the psychological safety, that's where the trauma can come in for the catalyst. The dependability is important. Like, they need a team that's dependable around them, because catalysts are the get shit done people, and they will get really frustrated if they're doing kind of the 80-20 like most people would. The structure and clarity, as you can imagine, is super important for catalysts too, because otherwise we'll just go wherever we see the next best thing is. So tell us, what do you want from us? Like, what does good look like? If I can't give you KPIs or objectives or goals for this year because you don't know what I'm going to deliver, how do we navigate that? Meaning is important because, as you've probably heard, there's a subtext of we're very passion driven. Like, we often bring our own personal passion into the work that we're doing, which can be an accelerant for us creating change, but can also have the downside of making us burn out faster. So as a leader, making sure that you're sort of helping to keep the boundaries of good work-life balance, and making sure that we're not taking on too many additional projects just because we're so passion driven. And then impact. And the thing that's important here for catalysts is we will often leave before the thing actually crosses the finish line. And this is where self-doubt and imposter syndrome can come in for catalysts, because that thing would never have existed if we hadn't been there and connected those dots and ignited the organization. But if we leave every time before it actually makes it to final market entry, we can feel unjustified in terms of claiming that as a win. So leaders can help catalysts understand the actual impact, hopefully positive, that they're having on the organization. I'll say, oops, we've created a download for catalysts to talk to their leaders about what they need. So we have some great questions there for, when you're sitting down with your next one-on-one or your quarterly review as a catalyst, you can sort of say, hey, here's some questions I'd like to think through with you about how we could best work together. But this is also great if you're a leader, because you can sort of preempt the questions that catalysts should be asking you, even if they're not. Thank you, Lori. You need to support your catalysts. So, I already said this before, providing the clarity, about what they can tackle. So if you have a corporate strategy where you have some big, audacious, unclear things that someone needs to tackle, give those to your catalysts, but be clear again about what you're asking for them and how far they can go. Provide clarity on how to best solve the problems while genuinely collaborating with the leaders. So this is important because you need to have the two-way conversation, and they need to know sort of what the best mechanisms are for solving those problems in your context. Creating that sense of safety. So they may bring ideas that are counter to the current business paradigm. You have to allow them to do that safely. You can say, look, we're not going to disrupt our current in-year revenue for that idea, so go find us another one, but thank you very much. And they will fail, to your point. I think it was Daniel earlier. This is the experimentation mindset, but you have to allow them to do so safely. And we could have a whole hour talk just about that. They need to see the impact. So this goes back, this is also, we're talking that this is the support that the leader should be giving them, and tell them if their ideas weren't implemented, the why or why not. Like that's legitimate feedback. We can take that. But if we just get gaslit about what we're doing, it leads to our burnout. And then help them with the handoff. So most catalysts say, I love setting up the processes and figuring out how to optimize everything in the organization. But if they were expected to just drive that after it was all implemented, they would definitely be on to their next thing. So as a leader, help them with the handoff so they don't get bored, and rinse and repeat, give them the next big challenge to tackle. And ensure that the catalysts are invested in bringing everyone along. So even though we talk about kind of like creating a catalyst network, you don't want a bullseye on the back of them. They need to be creating diverse teams so that they're actually able to create the change throughout the organization. So don't create that totally special catalyst club where they're the shiny thing. And finally, connecting them. You can hear from Eli, who's joined our community and is here today, but the internal support that catalysts get just by being connected, it can provide a safe space for them to experiment and learn, but also connecting them with catalysts from outside their organization. There's something incredibly healing about getting to spend time with other catalysts who have that really sometimes difficult lived shared experience, as you guys were talking about in chat. Connect your catalysts with leadership. So this is really important, is making sure, again, that they have the access so that they understand what the strategies are and how they can best support the strategies. Regular two-way communication really helps catalysts be successful. In fact, we tell catalysts, if you don't have some kind of leadership sponsor in your organization, or if that person is left, you really need to think about if you're safe staying in that environment. You need to find yourself another leader. So I'll just say really quickly, we do work with corporates to help them sort of do all of these things with catalysts. If you are a catalyst and you would love to sort of learn these tools to put into better practice and learn how to thrive, not just survive as a catalyst, we have essentials for catalysts. And Eli, who's with us today, is from the Catalyst Galaxy, which is our online global community. Entrepreneurs, people with side hustles, people from some of the world's largest, most innovative organizations. And with that, I'll stop and see if there's any questions, thoughts, or comments.
I saw a lot of people shaking their heads today. This is a interesting conversation. I think it's a conversation that we don't think about very often for some reason, because we're in it.
Totally. Yeah.
I'll just provide a TLDR. Literally in the last 48 hours, something that I and a sports chief information officer who I've tried to bring into the guild started late 2012 finally actually happened. So we were both at least 8 years ahead on vision for the organization he was representing and the organization I was representing. So
it's so painful. Yeah, it's so painful because also we can spin our wheels like at that starting point, like, and then we're like, why doesn't anyone get it? I joined, after Microsoft, I joined a startup where we were doing voice over IP bundled with, broadband to the house. And it was like, I was responsible for building out the whole international network, but it was like, everyone's like, I'm not going to get rid of my phone for my what? What's a DSL? And you want me to, and it's like, who has a landline now? It can be really painful to be so far ahead of the curve.
Yeah, the other learning I'll share, because my natural tendency is to be quite complex, but highly accurate in language and expression. But the CEO of one of those parties, who's a brilliant guy who's made literally hundreds of millions of dollars of personal worth out of his apartment 20 some years ago, actively told me to dumb it down several times on many of the complex business problems I perhaps foolishly, but passionately tried to drive in his organization, sort of as a side hustle beyond the confines of my job. So there is some research validation around plain language in communication and the preference. And I think with the 7-second attention span, dumbing it down has its place on the selling consensus side. So sometimes a mini version of an executive summary with, 3 key outcomes
Totally.
is the approach in to get that consensus and stop the resistance leading to the burnout cycle.
Yeah. In the class that we do, we spend 2 weeks on the orchestration part because that's the hardest part, really, and that's partly what you're talking about. And we talk about influence models, like understanding what the wins are, understanding how people like to receive the information, like all of those things, but also things like creating visual models. Like if you guys remember at the beginning of the pandemic, when they would show you, like, there'd be 2 people, and it's like, if you didn't infect one person, this one person, you stopped the infection of 100 other people. And that's how people understood what flattening the curve is. And so catalysts have to get really creative sometimes with the visual communication and the different communication styles and influence models that we think about. We talk about network maps too, like who do you need to influence? Because we can be really, we sometimes we're like, look at my shiny thing, and we just want to go show it to everyone. It's like, you don't need to show it to everyone. You need to be intentional about when you're actually engaging the resistors. You're probably best served by finding your supporters and advocates first. So like, who in the organization or system do you need to convince first and get on board, identify shared value with, and then you can sort of let them help the dominoes fall after that. Yeah, there was a question, I'm just curious about the context. Where do you think catalysts are underrepresented and could bring value to business and organizations? Nigel, can you say more about that?
Yeah, sure. And what I was really hoping to find out was, I had mentioned earlier on about innovation and strategy, and you had mentioned about IP and law. And I was just curious, like in your pathways, where do you see there is a need for catalysts that isn't currently being satisfied?
My answer is a little bit tongue in cheek, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, which is at the C-suite, whichever part of the C-suite we have. Like we need leaders. We need leaders who understand catalysts, in my opinion, and create the cultural context for catalysts to be successful. Because, and Rob and I can geek out on this for hours, but as I mentioned, the things that catalysts need, like they are the canary in the coal mine in terms of the culture, the cultural elements that are going to help organizations survive, right? And so we need leaders who are leaning into creating psychological safety, creating autonomy and accountability, creating more flexible organizations, creating organizations where people are given an opportunity to identify and solve a problem that isn't in their job descriptions, because job descriptions don't work anymore. Like the thing I wrote for you a year ago is no longer relevant, at the end of a global pandemic. So I mean it with all sincerity. We need more catalyst leaders in all of the different functions. I think if you get specific, if we have CHROs who are understanding this and helping with the hiring and the identification, and again, the internal supporting structures, like if you had to pick one, they're probably already doing chief digital innovation officer, chief strategy officer, those sorts of things. So if you could pick like the next one that I'd want to work on, it would be HR. And the good news is that HR is starting to disrupt itself. You see this bifurcation between SHRM and things like hack HR, disrupt HR, and all of that stuff. But I don't know, what do you guys think? Where do we need more catalysts?
I would say in general, from my experience, is the higher the compliance factor in a role, and secondarily, maybe administrative mindset, is where the change is most needed. So in HR, it's not necessarily at the CHRO level or maybe the chief talent officer, but it's more in the weeds of day-to-day operations that you're going to find a lot of resistance. Auditors, distinct lack of innovation in that role because it's inherently by the book. So there is a correlation that we see between high compliance.
That's an excellent point. And that's why having legal people who are a catalyst can be really, I mean, like my legal business partner at Cisco, and Cisco's very forward thinking in a lot of, so I don't want to paint them as like, but he did lean even outside of the box for Cisco. So I agree, people who are sort of the CYAs of the organization will have the biggest challenges with catalysts probably.
Yeah.
There might also be catalysts in those weeds who are working under the radar because it's not safe to showcase what they're doing or bring it to light. So they're just hovering just around here, not bringing it over here so that they don't get in trouble.
Yeah, to be clear, catalysts are throughout the organization, throughout every organization. I mean, and when you do things, you can do interesting overlaps. Like when we use DISC quite often when we do, catalyst events, and there are C's, if you guys are familiar, there are C catalysts. There's just not as many, when we think about some of the other neurodiversity things, there's a strong overlap between ADHD and the catalyst community. There's a strong overlap between highly sensitive people in the catalyst community. So we are everywhere. And to your point, it's like, how can we empower? You're losing opportunity. You're actually losing impact if the people feel like they need to fly beneath the radar. And what a lot of catalysts will do is they'll just have their side hustle. They're like, I'm just getting a paycheck over here. I know that my opinion's not valued. I could do 10x what the company is asking me to do. Like I had a job like that when I was a single mom for years. I was like, look, I phone it in my job and I do all of I was on search and rescue and I did a whole bunch of other stuff and I was a mom, And so it's like, how can we find those people and unlock their talent and their creativity within the organization? It's really just wasted opportunity for everybody. Any other thoughts or questions?
I'll just fill the void by adding that in certain areas, so if we're looking at, say, IT or, the connection to business support through technology, there are certain groups where there might be a high change resistance, and it does align to that sort of theoretical construct of too much adherence to a process, maybe some gaps. I'm talking about service desk. Typically, there's a lot of change resistance there, but interestingly, there is a strong correlation, and we've seen this through over the last decade. I've seen this through, hundreds of instances where the resistance army is the minority, and they're actually the people who are of least current value, typically, relative to the others. So we've had several situations where there was too much change and too much adherence to a past broken model and other factors like not having a good sense of service, right, which is actually necessary to the job in the modern age. So those people will self-select if the change is consensually agreed to by the 80%.
Right, but there becomes a tipping point, right?
They'll just quit.
Yeah.
So you solve multiple problems by getting most going in the right direction, and those who resist, unless they have power, will actually self-select out of the equation, and then you advance the agenda.
Totally. So there's a couple points there for me. One is, I want to be clear. I'm not advocating like, I don't think people can become catalysts. I think you either are or you aren't. And I'm not advocating for having, even on an innovation team, an entire catalyst team. Like that would be a fucking train wreck. So this is about having balance in the organization. I'm talking about a population of people who've been misunderstood. They didn't have the self-awareness. And so we do have, I think, an opportunity to, tap into this population, help the organizations, and create the cultural transformation at the same time that would benefit a lot of people. You need a normal distribution curve if you're going to keep your company running. You need the people, the laggards on the other half that are fighting for homeostasis so that you're not iterating every day on what your IT strategy is, right? Mm-hmm. To your point, we're doing these interviews of C-levels or leaders who are catalysts, who understood it and navigated interesting, changes during the VUCA time of last year during the pandemic. And this one woman was brought in as a CTO. She was supposed to be an individual contributor looking at the strategy. She quickly got, I think, product and then engineering under her. And, it was like, how long is a piece of string, right? Because every time she kept trying to figure out what they needed to do to be more effective, she wanted to make it more agile. She wanted to make it more customer focused. Your point is like all the things that it should be in the service economy, a customer focused economy. And she brought in a lot of people, and there's a lot of attrition because a lot of people are like, this isn't for me. She didn't have to force them out, and she didn't bring in all catalysts, but there was enough change that got that tipping point going where now the agile thing is the norm and people are talking to the customers and stuff.
Yeah, if you give them the platform to drive change, the secret, semi-catalysts and full catalysts in your midst have a platform and an opportunity to contribute, and they actually solve a lot of problems by having that platform and the support for a creative endeavor.
Totally. And they have the support, and that's the big piece, is having that executive support.
Eli, did you have a comment or question? Eli, you had your mic off. Did you plan to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking about the Resistance Army story, and I'm wondering if there's a brand of catalysts that are those who've been overly traumatized that become a part of that Resistance Army, that they have that potential, but like it's been inverted into not being positive or useful.
I've never seen anyone who could consciously choose to not be a catalyst. So I think there's trauma to the extent that people will do what I said, which is they'll fly under the radar in one place and they'll find a way to express their creative stuff. There are certainly frustrated catalysts, but I've never met a catalyst that I know of that's like, I'm going to be the curmudgeon now and fight against all things because I wasn't able to create the change that I wanted. It's possible, but thank you all for having me. Wonderful conversation. We'd love to see you in the galaxy. Happy to have conversations on LinkedIn, and I'll type in my email address and then to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon. I really appreciated everything that you had to say, and I think there's a lot of resonance with the people that were on this call. If you're not a member of the Grey Swan Guild, please consider joining us. There's some links on the slide and in the chat. And here are all the places that you can find us. I'm also going to put those in the chat for you. And if anyone has to leave right now, I'm just going to let you know that if you want to save the chat, down where you normally type in the chat, there's a little file button, but beside that, there's 3 dots, and that'll give you the opportunity, if you missed the links because they were going up too fast, just save the chat for yourself. We'll be recording the chat and it'll be posted somewhere likely, but if you want it right now, that's where it is. And let's see, then I'm going to start ending this session. We have 1 minute to go. So I'm going to end this session and start recording the next session. Stop recording.